Hello again, good morning, it's Friday again. I've got another food for thought. I'm Maurice Barrett, and I've been thinking, has God ever give you a promise? Has God ever spoken to you and give you a promise for the future? Have you ever had somebody prophesy over you and you knew it was God? Have you ever been reading your Bible and God's quickened a word to you and you knew it was for you personally? Well, I would think the majority of Christians could say yes, but I know so many Christians who have given up on the promises that didn't come to pass, and yet they believed they were God at the time. And one of the fundamental reasons is they weren't willing to wait. You know, the wheels of God's machinery grind very slowly. And we need patience. Paul says we need patience to inherit the promise. Let me read you. It's from Hebrews chapter 6, verse 12. Paul says that you're not slothful, but followers of them who through faith and patience inherit the promise. So maybe 2023 is your year of promise. It's only January. Maybe God will fulfill the promise this year. Maybe not. But don't give up. There's a saying, where there's life, there's hope. And that's true for the world, but we believe in the Creator God. And even when there's death, there's still hope, because God can raise the dead. You know, my wife's written a book, and I can recommend it. It's available from Amazon as a paperback or Kindle download. And it's called It's Past Midnight. What happened to the promise? She's taken the title from the thought that people say, well, God answers prayer on the last minute, a minute to midnight or 5 minutes to midnight, just before the sell-by date has happened. But that's not true. God answers prayer well past midnight, when the promise is dead and buried, when it can't happen. If we keep believing and have faith, God can bring the promise. He can raise it from the dead. Well, Joni gives a couple of illustrations in the book, and I'll share them with you. One of them is Zacharias and Elizabeth, the father of John the Baptist. They prayed for a son. Elizabeth was barren, so they prayed for a son for year after year after year. They were young and they wanted children, but she stayed barren, and she got past the age of childbearing, and so it can't happen now. So they buried the promise. And many years later, maybe 30, 40 years later, an angel came to Zacharias and he said, Zacharias, God's heard your prayer. He's going to give you a son. But Zacharias didn't want a son when he was old. He'd buried the promise 30, 40 years ago. Who wants a son in their old age? And he didn't believe God. And because of that, God had to strike him dumb until the child was born. See, God had heard the prayer, but he'd buried the promise. God honours faith. Another illustration she uses is Martha and Mary and Lazarus. Jesus clearly said this sickness is not unto death. Send the message to Mary and Martha, and then he waited 4 days. When he went, Lazarus was dead. They didn't believe. They buried him. They should have left him there so that Jesus could raise him from the dead. But you see, they buried Lazarus, they buried the promise, it's finished, and they recriminated Jesus. If you'd have been here, he wouldn't have died, but it's too late now, he's dead. But Jesus said, did I not say, this sickness is not unto death? Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. And God raised him from the dead. You see, that was well past the sell-by date. That was well past midnight. It was 4 days later, and it couldn't happen. But this is our God, if only we can believe it. Christians believe God in the head. They know God can heal. They know God can raise the dead. They know all these things. They know God's the provider. God's the security. But when it comes to it, they have no faith. They believe in the head, but they've no faith in the heart. Faith comes from the heart, not the head. And the test is when the trouble comes, when you pass the sell-by date, when it's past midnight, when the promise cannot happen. That's when you need patience and to inherit the promise. They thought death was the end. It was the end of the promise, but it wasn't. So let me encourage you for 2023, don't bury the promise you've been given. Even if it can no longer come to pass, if God's given it to you, if you're sure God's given it to you, God created everything out of nothing. So believe in God, not the circumstances. Time's gone again. Have a faith-filled week, in the heart, not in the head, and keep thinking